It's definitely not a shock that I'm making yet another video about polling. Not just because I mentioned my last video that I was going to make my next video all about polls, but because I do obviously polling videos all the time, talking about stuff like major party polling or the individual popularity ratings of leaders and why the numbers seem to be trending in the directions that they are. I'm definitely an amateur poll analyst, but I think that a lot of my insights have turned out to be true in both the short and long run. But anyways, I just wanted to talk about today, instead of that sort of general polling stuff, one of my big pet peeves when it comes to the polling industry. I know other people from other channels like Chris from the Great Canadian Bagel podcast also hates this. And what we hate is when polling companies try and pull Canadian voters on individual policy issues. It's one of the dumbest things going, and it influences Canadian parties and political analysts in the dumbest directions possible. People come out with this very red Tory, center left vision of the country because this polling is done so poorly that it ends up tricking people into thinking that the electorate is far more pro big government than they really are, because the questions are so just ham-handedly delivered to Canadians. I'm not sure if it's deliberate or not deliberate, but nobody should be taking these polls seriously. And specifically today, I think what ended up triggering a lot of people to just talk about this issue was the current polling from several different polling companies on the popularity of the carbon tax and people's thoughts on the carbon tax. There's also another thing about groceries I want to add in towards the end, but it's the carbon tax issue that's most egregious when you actually look at the questions being asked and the polling, contrasted to the way that Canadians are indicating that they'll vote in the next federal election. So this is the first one that I noticed that really rubbed me the wrong way. So it's about the carbon tax's general support. So carbon tax support shows 33% of people currently support the carbon tax, 29% opposed, 23 are neutral, and 14% are unsure. Does that sound like reality to you? The carbon tax has been around for quite a while. We've already had 2 elections about the carbon tax, and you're telling me that, forget about the support or oppose, that there is a combined 37% of people who still don't know, a plurality of people who are either unsure or undecided or neutral on the issue of the carbon tax, something that has objectively been raising prices for people at a time that affordability issues, not even based on the polling, but just based on talking to people and the general sentiments around Canada, affordability is pretty much the top issue for most people, or basically the economy. I find the way that when pollsters ask people their top issues, they end up breaking down a lot of things that could just be summed up as the economy too much. But do you really think that there's 37% of people either neutral or undecided on the carbon tax these days? It's an incredibly polarizing issue, and there's a reason why the Liberals are running away from it. It's not because they have 33 solid support on it and with a bunch of extra people who just don't know or don't care. That's ridiculous. It's not just 29% support of why the Axe the Tax movement, started by Jim Carhalios back when he was getting rid of Patrick Brown as the Ontario PC leader. There's a reason why this stuff was so popular back then, and it is still popular now. It's not because 27 or 29% of people want to get rid of the carbon tax. It's way higher than that. But just the general ways that these pollsters will ask questions, or they'll ask you a bunch of leading questions before they get to that question, which puts you into a more save the planet kind of a mindset, this kind of thing where they ask you, so are you a good person or a bad person, with the general idea that if you keep picking the environmental option, then you must be a good person. Like, I've seen this in polls before, that the questions that come before more serious questions are leading you to be more open towards big government policies. It's ridiculous. But this is what I meant when I talked about in a previous video, the difference between people's stated preference and their revealed preference. Like the example I used that time, which was from a study. If you ask people what kind of coffee they like, if you describe different varietals of coffee you can buy at the grocery store, disproportionately people will say that their favorite type of coffee or their favorite profile of coffee is strong and bold, even though most people buy usually mild or medium blends that are smoother. It's not really, but it just sounds like something that you should like, because, well, if you don't like strong, bold coffee, why are you even drinking coffee? That's kind of like the implication you get from some coffee snobs in society, which pushes more people in polling to try and pick those options. And that's exactly what's happening here, at least in my opinion. I could like I guess I don't have the back end results fully from these pollsters or the questions they asked on the phone. But like this does not reflect reality if you walk around Canada for 5 seconds. But here's another part of one of these polls. I think this is also from Innovation Research. And the question is support for the federal government's exemption on the carbon tax on home heating. The opposition is 28% for the carbon tax for the federal government to exempt the carbon tax on home heating oil. So this is specifically about how 40% of households in the Maritimes got an exemption on home heating oil in order to basically not have to pay the carbon tax. Only 28% opposed, 27% support, and 31% are neutral. This has been a major issue in the Canadian media since Justin Trudeau gave the exemption to the Maritimes because people see it as deeply unfair and they would like their own home heating to be carbon tax exempt. Obviously, if you pull Maritimers on this, they will, or at least the 40% who use home heating oil, are going to be very predisposed to saying that they support the exemption. But the question is so gnarled. It should have been the pause been extended to all forms of home heating? Should it have just been given to home heating oil, or should nobody have gotten the exemption? That's an actual fair question. This is a very dumb yes or no that makes the Canadian public look much more mixed on the issue of home heating carbon tax pauses. It's very popular for the pause to go into place, but the way they pitch this question makes it look like there might be a bunch of carbon tax supporters out there who don't want any exemptions made, when in reality it's probably a lot of people out there who just think it's unfair that they didn't give the exemption. And even some of the supporters might be people who just generally oppose the carbon tax, so they will back any pause that can be put into place in order to save people money. Anyways, here's another one of the questions. So support for the federal government's program to provide low-income homes with electric heat pumps. 53% support, 15% oppose, and neutral is 22%. I highly doubt that this is a real outcome from a poll that would be reflected in people's voting patterns. Because really, it's just saying, do you want to give people good things? Do you think it'd be great if the government would provide some people some good things? And people are saying, well, sure, it's good to provide people good things, when they're not going to tell you that anyone who just does not qualify for this program still pays more taxes, who could be a low-income individual who doesn't get the heat pump. And so what this is turning into, like all government programs are supposedly going to help the poor, it helps a tiny little sliver of the lower income population and then damages the rest of them. This is not a poll question that should be asked to people because people don't have enough knowledge on what a lot of these programs entail, what the effect's going to be, and how much it's going to cost to be able to install this in each individual home. Without a doubt, or almost without exception, the government spends way more money delivering a program than it would cost if the person just went out and bought a heating pump for themselves. Yes, maybe someone in low income couldn't pay for it, but it doesn't help them if you're only giving maybe 1 out of every 10 low income people a heat pump, but the rest of those low income people get to help pay for it. It's ridiculous. Anyways, here's another question. This one is, do you think, this one is from Nanos Research, and they actually put the quote of what the question was. So it reads, do you think a carbon tax on things like gas is effective in encouraging people to use less fuel? And it says 61% say not effective and 36% say effective. Now, this one's a little bit closer to reality in terms of I could see some people being under the misapprehension that the carbon tax actually keeps people from using as much fuel. It doesn't. Oil and gas, or just energy in general, is an inelastic good. People spend as much as the price is going to be to fill up their tank, and they're going to drive all the places that they were already going to drive, because people don't exactly just sort of drive in circles. It's not one of these beer and popcorn sort of things that the Paul Martin liberals suggested back in the day, that if you give someone money, they're just going to spend it on nonsense. People don't fuel up their car to drive nonsense places. They're usually fueling up their vehicles to go to work, or to go pick up groceries, or to go pick up their kids from hockey or school. It's not, people aren't just burning gasoline for fun. But this is why it's a dumb question to ask people, because people, one, they don't realize, I don't think enough people realize that the carbon tax has not cut emissions in any way, shape, or form. And then also, who cares? What does the Canadians' opinion on if it's effective or not actually affect whether or not the carbon tax is effective? It's not effective. So what's the point of asking people? But this is, again, to try and make analysts who might be advising parties, and this is what happens with conservatives, advisors or consultants inside the Conservative Party will read dumb polls like this and they'll think, maybe it's not worth opposing the carbon tax because look at this poll up here. 33% of people support it, only 29% oppose it, when it's just a poorly constructed poll question. So it's coming to results that don't reflect reality because this poll question itself doesn't reflect reality. So the results are not going to either. Anyways, here's another one. It says, when it comes to the carbon tax on things like gas, is it important to protect the environment in the long term, which got 53% of the support, or keep costs down today, 40%? I highly doubt this is accurate in any way. Again, in an election we're leading into in 2025, in which the top issue, without a doubt, for the vast majority of people is affordability, do you really think that most people are going to actually, that's not the right one, but do you think 53%, a majority, are going to say that the carbon tax or that government program should be primarily focused on environmental impact before affordability? So is everyone, whenever Nanos, and even Nanos does poll people's top issues, I believe, and like 35 or 45% of their top issues, everyone's top issues are pretty much economic issues, and only like 6 or 7% of people pick environment. Do we really think all those people who pick economic issues are lying? But again, it's a poll question skewed in order to get to a result. It says when it comes to the carbon tax, on things like gas, it is more important to. The thing is that it doesn't actually, it basically asks a leading question, basically saying, should the function of the carbon tax be to keep costs down or protect the environment? The stated intent of the carbon tax is to protect the environment. So you basically just ask people, is the carbon tax meant to do the things that the carbon tax stated it's meant to do? And most people are going to say, I guess it is. It's not a real question. Anyways, here's the one on groceries. I'm just going to use one of the two grocery questions. This is another policy question in which it's not worth asking people because not enough people know about the issue. And even those who do, they're mostly just going to know what the legislation proposes to do. Most people are not like their own political commentators who read all the resources that come out of the government and then make up their own minds on what all these different policies mean and if they're going to be effective or not. Most people have lives and they're either working or doing some sort of leisure activity. They're not engaging in politics in such a detailed level that they're going to have a coherent opinion on any of this stuff. We literally like as Chris from like the Great Canadian Bagel podcast points out, we literally elect politicians in order to evaluate if these are good policies or not. You're not supposed to poll the public on every single tiny minute detail about policies, but they're pretending like certain policies are popular simply because you throw an incredibly complex question at people and they don't know, so they're just going to sort of agree with however, if the policy sounds good on its face or not. So here's what it says. And here, no, this is another energy one. I guess I'm going to have to pull up the one I had on the groceries, but I'll still talk about this one. So this one says, will a carbon tax make you more or less likely to use more energy efficient, environmentally friendly alternatives when it comes to day-to-day life? And it says more likely is 50%, less likely 33%, unsure 17%. 50% of people are lying, and the other 33% of people, in my mind, picked the correct, honest answer. But again, read that question. It's basically asking you: are you a good person or a bad person? Are you going to hurt the environment or save the environment? Who's going to say, oh, I'm less likely? I think they're being honest, and I think they're seeing through what the question's asking them. They're saying, is the carbon tax going to make you act like a more responsible, environmentally friendly person or not? And then they're finding out that a bunch of people are just going to say, yeah, I guess it is. It is not because those people actively are doing anything. There's a reason, again, since the carbon tax has been around, people have not actually been emissions have not gone down significantly at all. Anyways, I found the polling question on groceries here, and this will be the last thing I talk about because this video is already kind of long. But this is so monumentally stupid. Never ask people questions about policies like this. It's very manipulative. This is the polling question on groceries. It reads, and this is from Abacus data. Usually I like Abacus data, but shame on them for doing this. It says, would you support or oppose federal, provincial governments making it mandatory for large grocery chains to follow the grocery code of conduct? And it says support 70%, oppose 10%. Please tell me, I would love to know what percentage of people know what the grocery code of conduct is. I've read about the grocery code of conduct. It's nonsense. If you actually read it, it's just fluff saying that, prices should be predictable and transparent. I'm like, sorry to tell people, other than the small bread scandal among some of the grocery store chains, like raising the price of bread slightly, one of the cheapest products on the shelves possible. Other than that, there's no significant amount of price gouging in Canada. The reason prices are going up is because the government prints and spends too much money and they tax too much. That's it. But this entire question is to basically push the idea that Canadians want grocery store chains held accountable. Ask a real question. Ask Canadians what they think the leading cause of grocery store prices going up are. Is it price gouging? Is it taxes and spending from the government? Or is it just world events, or is it general inflation? Most people are going to pick taxes from the government and way too much spending and government caused inflation, because that's what most people think. But when you design questions like this, you basically just go up to voters and say, do you agree with me? Yes or no? You should pick yes. And then the person picks yes. And then you're wondering why you have such high approval for the carbon tax, when obviously all of these polling questions are skewed towards trying to warp people into saying that they approve of the carbon tax, or if it's not intentional, these are just incompetently designed questions. I'm not a professional pollster, but every time questions like this come out, it never gets reflected by the way people are actually going to vote. If carbon tax polling was this close, do you think that Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party would be running away from their own policy and trying to give out exemptions for things like home heating oil? No, that's not what. Obviously, internal party polling is probably showing that the Conservative Party's position on the carbon tax, wanting to fully eliminate it, is the most popular position. That's why the Conservatives are way ahead of the Liberals in the polling. The Liberals wouldn't be this far behind if a bunch of their top line policies were polling as mixed as the carbon tax is supposedly polling. Anyways, that's it for me today. You can donate to my legal fund in the description of the video below. I don't want to drag this out too much. Basically, being sued by a billionaire, I'm winning it. It's an extremely stupid defamation case, but he's still costing me over $25,000. Donate to it if you want. Links in the description below. I'm also running for the Calgary Signal Hill Conservative Party nomination. So if you live in that riding, buy a Conservative Party membership and vote for me once I get approved for the ballot and they call a voting date. Other than that, that's it for me today. This video has gone on way too long, but it just demonstrates my ability to talk about polling incessantly. I'll definitely be back in a future video, probably in less than a week, talking about polling again. I hope it doesn't drive you guys crazy, because although it kind of drives me crazy, I at least like talking about it.